Hello and welcome to Dogtors Without Borders, the podcast from the Michigan State University College of Veterinary Medicine. Today we're exploring the world of biosafety and its critical role in protecting both human and animal health. We're excited to introduce Dr. Kim Dodd, Dean of the College of Veterinary Medicine, and Dr. DiRita, Chair of the Department of Microbiology, Genetics, and Immunology. Dean Dodd, Dr. DiRita, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having us.
Morning. Great to be here.
Well, Dr. DiRita, I've been looking forward to having this opportunity to chat with you.
Really? All right. Well, I look forward to it too.
We've had a chance to work together for the last 3 years when I was director of the veterinary diagnostic laboratory, and we've sort of shared our affection for infectious diseases. And I've realized that I don't know much about your career path in microbiology, other than you spent 25 years working in medical schools and now have a unique position leading a shared department in both the medical schools and veterinary school.
Yeah, that's a good encapsulation of it for sure. So, I came to Michigan State about 10 years ago, 9 years ago to be specific, after having spent, as you said, 25 years at University of Michigan in the medical school. And what's interesting about MSU, and one of the things that really attracted me to MSU, is this shared department concept where rather than being affiliated with a single college, we're in the microbiology department affiliated with 4 colleges and the Ag Bio Research Station, which is an excellent partner as well. So the opportunity to do research, education, and service beyond borders of just the medical school, and in particular associating with my research and also a lot of research in our department with the vet school, was a real attraction to me to come here. So that's my story. I actually came here to be part of the vet school in particular because of the type of research I do and the type of research that I'm interested in, and the excellent work in that area in my department that I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about as we go on. But I want to hear a little bit more about you, because the Plum Island thing to me is just so exotic. I've read novels related to Plum Island, but nothing real. So how close are the novels to reality?
I think you're aware, I grew up on Long Island, New York, which is very closely affiliated with Plum Island. Plum Island sits in the Long Island Sound between the north coast of Long Island and Connecticut. And as a kid, we'd go to the beach and you could see Plum Island, but we knew the massive security around it. In fact, I have an uncle who has a boat, and he would love to see how close he could take his boat to Plum Island before the security started yelling at him.
Started firing live rounds above his head.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my experience with Plum Island. And then, many, many years later, I found myself working there. But sort of like you, I read Nelson DeMille's Plum Island, which is I have a story about my uncle and a road trip where he and I were driving together, and I was doing the night shift, and I was listening to that as a podcast or as an audiobook, and he woke up and was traumatized, but that's neither here nor there. But so both at the time as a kid reading Nelson DeMille's Plum Island on the beach, I also read The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. And reading both of those books, I was like, who gets to work at these sorts of places? And so if you're not familiar, the Hot Zone is all about Ebola and working in the biosafety level 4 or BSL-4 laboratories at CDC. And little would I know that without ever setting out an intention to work in either of those places, I'd have the privilege to be at both.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. So most of the research labs that we have on campus that work with bacteria or viruses are under operation principles that are essentially called biosafety level 2. In that environment, people wear lab coats, they wear gloves, they're careful with how they manipulate and handle the microbes, but there's no real threat to human health or transmission of the microbes in the laboratory. BSL-3 is a step up in terms of the requirements for safety. Very often the BSL-3 pathogens are pathogens that have a respiratory phase of transmission, so they can be spread through the air. And that requires special containment facilities, both in terms of the HVAC of the building to be able to create positive pressure and circulate the air, et cetera. And also for the workers themselves to be wearing respiratory devices to work with these pathogens at the benchtop. At Michigan State, we have both research BSL-3 facilities and the diagnostic BSL-3 facilities that you have at the VDL. I assume at Plum Island you have both BSL-3 and BSL-4. Is that right? Or
No, that's a common, no. We have
Okay.
BSL-3 and BSL-3 Ag. So what
Okay.
really distinguishes Plum Island are two things. One is it had significant laboratory space that was large enough to house livestock for us to look at some BSL-3 pathogens.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that Plum Island, by its nature of being on the island, was identified as the place in the U.S. where we could work on high consequence foreign animal diseases. So agents not currently in the U.S., but should they come here, could have a catastrophic impact on our livestock populations.
Mhm.
And so, for example, to this day, Plum Island is the only place where we can handle foot and mouth disease virus.
Okay. That's so. Were people working on those things for research purposes or for surveillance, for diagnostics? What were they doing?
All of the above.
Okay.
So Plum Island's really unique in that it includes 3 government agencies. So USDA ARS, the Agricultural Research Service, which is the research arm of USDA and does vaccine development, most recently for African swine fever. We had USDA APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and that's where I was based at the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. And as that name suggests, our primary role was in diagnostics and outbreak response. And then the third agency was the Department of Homeland Security. After September 11th, they were tasked with managing the island because, of course, of the potential threats of a bioterrorism event. And so they operated the island and then also had a small research program really focused more on bioterrorism aspects of these infectious agents. BSL-4 laboratories are what people think about when you think about the movies. It's the spacesuit laboratories where you really zip up in a suit. All of your air is contained. But what's sort of interesting is that in that, you're still working in a normal laboratory. You're still working in a biosafety cabinet. It's just an additional layer of protection, and that you're still maintaining the best techniques in the laboratory to promote biosafety.
The research that we have with the BSL-3 includes people, one of whom is Rob Abramovich, who's a DVM faculty member also in the CHM, and Sean Crossan, who's CNS and CVM. And they both work on pathogens. Rob works on Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which they will tell you infects about 1/3 of the world's population. And so it's pretty nasty pathogen. We have some drugs against it, but those are failing because of resistance. And Sean works with an animal pathogen called Brucella, which is one of the ones that you mentioned, concerns regarding bioterrorism after 9/11. So Brucella is also a BSL-3 pathogen, and that also has the special characteristic or categorization called select agent, which could be potentially weaponized and used as a bioterror agent. We also have another fellow who's not in the vet school, but probably should be, that's Andrew Olive, who's in the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and he works on a number of respiratory questions, but also those including BSL-3 pathogens such as Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So there's a great deal of basic fundamental research going on here in the BSL-3 that we're aiming for with that research towards new therapeutics or new ways to control the pathogens and to protect both human and animal health. What kind of stuff do you envision seeing in the BSL-3 here as we're considering growing this capacity? Tell us a little bit about what goes on in the diagnostic lab with the BSL-3.
Thank you for that wonderful opportunity to talk about the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, or the VDL. So there we have dedicated BSL-3 laboratory space that's used primarily for diagnostic purposes. And there we handle, for the last 2.5 years, we've been working on high-path avian influenza as that outbreak has been ongoing. It's where we did all of the COVID testing early on in the pandemic, when we were testing human as well as animal samples. And what's wonderful about the diagnostic laboratory is that because of the way it's set up for diagnostic purposes, we can utilize those BSL-3 laboratory spaces, not to just test for viruses we already know, like high-path avian influenza, but also to be able to look for emerging pathogens. And that's where I see the most exciting link between diagnostics and research, especially as we think about growth in terms of our researchers here at MSU. So if you can imagine that if we were to have an outbreak in animals and samples arrive at the laboratory. We test it for all the most common causes of that in that particular animal species and turn up all negative results. We can then look to do additional diagnostics to look for new and emerging viruses that may require BSL-3 conditions. And so being able to develop additional BSL-3 laboratory space on campus for research purposes allows for a seamless transition of those emerging viruses into research activities to support looking at enhanced diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, and doing basic research on these new pathogens. I really do believe veterinary medicine sits in an important role or plays a critical role as we look at emerging infectious diseases. We know that 70% of new emerging diseases in humans come from an animal source. And as veterinary diagnostic laboratories, we are uniquely poised to detect that early. And being able to have those additional capabilities to rapidly transition new potentially new or novel viruses or bacteria into the hands of researchers here at MSU really allows us to play a unique role as we think about the future of infectious disease and the potential for additional pandemics.
Yeah, and actually one of the things where we're a little deficient right now is in that handoff with the VDL. I think the VDL has these fantastic modern labs for BSL-3 containment. We're a little bit less well equipped in the research side, and so hoping that we can continue to grow this space at MSU. We have our 3 researchers who are fundamentally doing this work are about 2 miles south of campus doing their work in an old containment facility. We recently, through generous support from the university, updated that facility about 5-6 years ago, and it's terrific to be able to have a slightly updated facility, but we need more space on campus to be able to do this type of research, because one of the things we haven't really talked about is the research and the BSL-3 work that happens at VDL is not the same kind of stuff that goes on in BSL-3 labs for our researchers who are doing more fundamental work. And those two things are by charter supposed to be distinct to each other from what the VDL does. And I know there's been a lot of collaboration with VDL, and that's fantastic. But to get researchers and to grow the research at Michigan State in BSL-3 pathogens, we're really looking to get more space. So what are we thinking about there, Kim?
No, absolutely. I mean, we need to maintain the VDL BSL-3 space as being specific for diagnostics, because in the case of a big outbreak like we're seeing now with high-path avian influenza, that laboratory is in constant use for that purpose. Our goal is really to be able to build additional BSL-3 space that meets the emerging needs of today. And so space that would be able to house 3 to 4 additional researchers with an interest in infectious diseases. Again, not only to be able to support efforts to detect and respond to emerging diseases, but to really be able to grow our strengths as a university in terms of infectious disease research. And so I guess my question for you is, what are some cool areas you think about in terms of building out microbiology's research in the BSL-3 arena?
So I love that question. I mean, I'm always thinking about, first and foremost, keeping the folks here happy and making sure that this is a place that they feel they can do their most impressive research. These are all investigators with a great deal of federal funding for their work, and it's important that they be able to maintain at a level that our peer institutions are doing, because otherwise those peer institutions start looking pretty good to those guys, and we want to keep that from happening. But the second thing is that there, as you point out, there are emerging pathogens all the time that we are incapable of researching here because we just don't have the space available. So the one that's probably the most on people's minds is SARS-CoV-2, which still requires BSL-3 research space we don't have available. So if we want to grow in the area of understanding that pathogen and better diagnostics for it, better vaccines, et cetera, then we need more research space for that. There are other pathogens in the BSL-3 world that we could study that we, again, don't have the capacity or to grow we have a great TB group here. So growing the TB group into more of a center for that. Rob Abramovich, the CVM investigator working on TB, has started a company to look for new drugs. And so growing that sort of capacity at Michigan State would be fantastic. but we can't do it with the capacity that we're built at right now. So that's a big push for us, for sure.
I'm going to come back to something I probably should have said earlier. Following the pandemic, we've seen an interest in ramping up BSL-3 level research across the country. And there's been additional federal grant dollars available to be able to support building some of these new facilities, which, as someone who spent her career working in BSL-3 and BSL-4 labs around the country and around the world, you appreciate how few and far between they are and how valuable it is to have really excellent facilities to be able to do the research at the highest quality. And so I think it's important for us as MSU, as we think about being leaders in this area, is to ensure that we can build the best quality resources for our researchers, not only to retain the excellent folks we already have, but to really build a center that will recruit more people in as we continue to build this as an area of emphasis.
Right. And we also want to think globally, right? I mean, there's a lot of pathogens that are coming out of different parts of the world that, again, at least to begin with, they're typically requiring BSL-3 space to study. We don't have plague in the United States, thank goodness, but there is plague around the world, and it's something that we want to consider studying. We can study that pathogen. It's a pathogen called Yersinia, and in fact, there's a great deal of Yersinia research at Michigan State historically through an investigator in our department named Robert Brubaker. But those strains that people study the plague with right now at Michigan State or elsewhere would be attenuated. So they're not really pathogens anymore. So we can study them at a certain level, but not really doing some of the work that if we had a BSL-3 capacity to grow in that area, we would be doing. So when we think about emerging pathogens, we're often thinking about the need to have BSL-3 facilities just to begin studying them. And so growing in areas that are threatening the world, but not necessarily the United States, requires us to be a little bit broader in our thinking with the BSL-3 for sure. So,
absolutely. Yeah. I've spent many years in Africa looking at or working with colleagues there, trying to identify ways to identify potentially emerging diseases before they emerge by collecting samples from species that we know are likely to carry potentially zoonotic viruses, whether they're primates or bats or rodents. And so much of that work then often comes back to the U.S. And to your point, if we don't know what's there, we need to be able to err on the side of caution from a biosafety and biosecurity perspective, requiring that additional BSL-3 space.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we think about all the time, and it's kind of related to what you just talked about, but it's the whole concept of One Health, which the vet school really leads, I think. I think actually an emerging, growing partnership between the vet school and the College of Osteopathic Medicine in One Health, because they've got a pretty broad global footprint in One Health already, and with the natural alignment of that with the vet school interests, I think is something that we can really expand our research capacity and get a much bigger global footprint for the vet school, which I think is really important. That could be your legacy.
I've committed to 10 years, so
okay, good. Well, you got 10 years to build the legacy.
No, I think that's a great point, and it's a really exciting time at MSU. I think we have new leadership with our new president. Mm-hmm. We've got several new deans coming on board, and ongoing discussions about health sciences here at MSU and what that looks like, and how we might be able to take more of a campus-wide One Health approach. Mm-hmm. As you've noted, One Health is often led by colleges of veterinary medicine for probably obvious reasons for every veterinarian listening. But so it's really exciting to have the interest across campus of figuring out how we can work together to respond to emerging disease threats, both in terms of infectious diseases, but also things like cancer and other chronic diseases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the researchers that we have now are attracting people to their labs from other countries who recognize them as high power, publishing in outstanding journals and want to come here and be part of that research. So it's another one of the pillars of our mission for MSU 2030 or whatever our strategic plan is called, to get more of a international kind of alignment with our students and our training. And I think Rob and Andrew and Sean, and we have a lab I haven't mentioned much about over in Giltner, a fellow named Jiang Shi, who's working with the malaria and mosquitoes and trying to contain malaria through bioengineering of mosquitoes. But those labs all attract people from around the world that want to come and work in their labs. So as we grow the research, we're also looking to grow programs that can attract people from other countries to do their PhD training here or their post-PhD training here, postdoc training.
Is to talk about growing our global footprint. We also have to be mindful of the fact that with climate change, we're actually seeing new viruses or viruses not previously in Michigan come in. Mm-hmm. We've seen several cases of West Nile virus and Eastern equine encephalitis this year already, with tick ranges expanding. Many of these agents require BSL-3 laboratories, mm-hmm. both for diagnostics as well as for work on therapeutics and vaccines. So in some ways, some of the new agents will be coming to us as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. I mean, we have experts at Michigan State that we routinely hear on the radio now because people want to hear about global warming and infectious diseases. So we hear Ned Walker frequently on the radio talking about mosquito populations and how they're changing around the world. And in particular in Michigan, we're starting to see things, as you point out, that we haven't seen before. So important to stay in front of this. So our goal, I guess, is to expand our capacity here. And I know we've been looking at different sites on campus. One of the things that people sometimes think about with the BSL-3s is the safety to the public. That's something that I tend to, I don't want to sound, I tend to poo-poo because I don't think it's a big problem with the safety. I joke a lot that if you really are concerned about the safety of undergraduates, then you should probably move your chemistry department to another part of the campus instead of the central part of campus. So my chemistry department friends who are listening to this, don't shoot me for that. But we really don't have serious risks with biosafety level 3 labs. When I was at Michigan, we had 2 biosafety level 3 labs in the same building as the University of Michigan Hospital, and it was just never a concern with anybody. So what's your thought about that? You've been at Plum Island, you've seen all the, you've read Nelson DeMille. So tell us about what we should be thinking about regarding safety to the public.
Yeah, I love that question. When Plum Island was established and utilized as a laboratory space for high consequence animal diseases, it was chosen because it's on an island, with an idea being that it was going to provide an additional layer of security from the viruses from the laboratory. If they were to get out of the lab, they would have to cross a body of water before it could get to animals and cause an outbreak, right? And so, at the time the laboratory was established almost 60 years ago, that there was probably rationale for that. But now here we are in 2024, and our technology has changed so much. So Plum Island is reaching the end of its lifespan as a laboratory.
Interesting.
And is moving to Manhattan, Kansas, which you may think for a laboratory that works specifically on things like foot and mouth disease virus, arguably the most feared animal disease virus that does not exist in the US and should have come here, could wipe out multiple livestock species. You could ask, how is it possible? And many Kansans did ask that. Mm-hmm. I don't want this laboratory in, Tornado Alley. And the reality is that the technology in terms of both biosafety and biosecurity, the building infrastructure capabilities are so different now than they were 60 years ago, that they are built to withstand, and with an emphasis on containment, especially. As I've mentioned, I've had the privilege of working both at Plum Island and at CDC in the Biosafety Level 4 laboratory. And I love telling students my story. And they always say, I want to do what you did, or how did you get to do that? And the reality is I'm one of the luckiest people I know. But it's really important to me. And it's probably one of the reasons why I was most interested in doing what a dean does, is being able to create similar opportunities for veterinary students that I had. I actually did my PhD at CDC, which is a very rare opportunity. And so one of my goals is to be able to identify opportunities for students who are interested in emerging infectious disease, to develop these unique opportunities for them to be able to gain this rare expertise and then be able to continue to push us forward in these fields.
Yeah, and we have the natural opportunities here at MSU that are really quite attractive in that area because, for example, the vet school has this CMIB, comparative medicine and integrative biology, I believe is the name of the program, but CMIB is what we all call it. When I started at Michigan, I was in a department initially called the Unit for Laboratory Animal Medicine, and I had no idea what that was. And when I got there, because I just knew I was going to get a faculty position, and I was also in the microbiology department at U of M. But I had this appointment in something called ULAM, and it turns out ULAM is comparative medicine. That's what they do. They monitor and control and regulate the lab animals on campus, and they also had a pretty extensive comparative medicine fellowship program, so training people like yourself coming out of vet schools or coming out with DVM PhDs. Our CMIB program here is very much like that program, and it's one of the things I find really attractive in the vet school. We have students in our department in micro. We're housed in the biomedical and physical sciences building, which is the BPS building across the street from the College of Vet Medicine. But we have CMIB students over there who are working in some of these labs that we're talking about, the biosafety labs, and having, veterinary PhD students who are out of their veterinary training, or at least in a pause for their classroom and clinical training in veterinary medicine, learning to do PhD level research, benefits them, I imagine, quite a bit. They're attracted to us, so I assume it benefits them. But it benefits us tremendously for them to come with their level of expertise and their perspective of people who think about animals and sort of the whole health of an organism infected with a pathogen, as opposed to just the pathogen and maybe just the envelope of the pathogen. Sometimes we get pretty narrow cast. So having these dual degree students that the vet school has been really good at developing programs for, I think, is something that benefits not just the students but the researchers as well. So, in fact, we just submitted a new training grant to the NIH in this area, ecology, evolution, and mechanisms of infectious diseases. And we're really hoping to attract veterinary trainees and pre-med and medical school trainees as well to do dual degrees with us.
I'm trying not to do a happy dance in my chair thinking about that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that through MGI, we get a lot of excellent students through BMS, the Biomedical Sciences graduate program. Mm-hmm. And one of those graduates, who then did her postdoc in Andrew Olive's lab, now works with the veterinary diagnostic laboratory. So she's a PhD level scientist with a real interest in diagnostics, and has come in and is now our regional scientist representing the Midwest in a new nationwide program of 5 laboratories, 5 regions that are focused on developing both regional and national capacity to rapidly detect and respond to emerging infectious diseases. So there's so much potential, I think, for students coming back and forth.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, you're talking about Kayla Conner.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kayla's fantastic. And she's one of the types of people that I'm talking about, that we want these people to envision their careers at MSU and not to say this is a good place to launch, but if I really want to get big in this area of biocontainment research, I need to go somewhere else. And so we'd hate to lose talent. Somebody like Kayla in particular, she's just fantastic. That's another thing, a shout out I'll give to MSU compared to U of M, being in a department like MGI, microbiology, genetics, and immunology, and having appointments for our faculty across multiple colleges. It just creates an environment where, you get this kind of very flat administrative structure where there's not a lot of barriers to interdisciplinary research, where we have veterinary students working with people in the medical school. And when I was at U of M, as great a place as that is, and as a wonderful time as I had there, I was embedded in the medical school, and that's where our students came from. That's where we interacted with largely. I mean, we had cross-campus collaborations, but administratively, they were a little bit more difficult to make happen. Joint appointments across colleges just essentially didn't happen. Joint appointments across departments were challenging there, whereas at Michigan State, it's just in the bloodstream, and it works really, really well here. So if the president's listening, anything that you can do to make sure that stays the same, irrespective of the budget model at Michigan State, I think it's an important value here that we should really try to maintain.
Vic, I often credit you for making me feel so at home at MSU, because when I started as director of the veterinary diagnostic lab, which is also 2 miles south of campus and can feel a little far out further, there. Yeah. And in a role that might not necessarily result in a lot of engagement across campus, you as chair of a shared department rapidly introduced me to people in multiple colleges. And I think within a couple months of starting, we'd put together a proposal of 4 or 5 colleges to do some work in the One Health arena. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so exciting and so unique.
Yeah, it really is unusual here. I mean, and in fact, I think when we were starting the veterinary school strategic plan under Birgit Pushner a few years ago, we had consultants coming from LA who did a lot of academic medical enterprise strategic planning. And I remember talking to them because they do a lot of preliminary interviews with people who are doing part of the strategic planning, just asking questions and explaining to them how the cross appointments here work, how the multiple colleges and the departments that are shared work. And one of them said, we do a lot of these things around the country, and we hear a lot about how there's low barriers to interaction and everything. And she said, I've never seen anything quite like MSU. And I feel the same way. I've been in academics my entire career. I have friends at a lot of different places, and we are unique in how we structure ourselves around focusing on interdisciplinary and interdepartmental, intercollege, cross-college interaction. So high value, and I think it really has a tremendous value to our faculty, but also to our students.
I couldn't say it any better than that.
Yeah. We're still trying to get you an appointment in MGI, so I hope we can count on that.
I'm still wrangling for one.
Yeah.
I love hanging out with your faculty.
Yeah, well, they love hanging out with you too, so hopefully we'll make that happen. So a DVM dean with or CVM dean with an appointment in micro, I think would be pretty cool.
Be pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Dr. Dodd and Dr. DiRita, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience and expertise.
That's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to do so. Kim, great to be with you as always.
Always great chatting with you.